In Hebrew, they say, go to Gaza, in the way we say, go to hell. This was my first visit. We're just meters away from the frontier at this stage, right over there where that yellow taxi is. That's Gaza. The first thing I saw was a terrorist's funeral. I'd come here to find out how September 11th had affected the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, and a lot more was going to happen than I'd ever bargained for. Osama Heles had murdered an Israeli mother of 4 children before he too was shot. But they call him a martyr, a hero of the Intifada, the struggle against Israel. He was a member of the Islamic group Hamas. He'd gone on a mission from which he knew there was no return.
Osama! This is the man who was killed last night.
He spent the money he'd saved for university on a Kalashnikov.
We're hoping to speak to his mother in here.
In his community, Osama was a son to be proud of, popular, quiet, and well-behaved. I'm proud of my dead son, she said. The mother of a martyr is meant to hide her grief.
So he's a hero.
His sister took me upstairs to his bedroom. It was just as he'd left it.
إنه هرب من الدنيا التعيسة ليذهب إلى الآخرة المليئة بالنعم.
She said, I'm sorry that he beat me to it in becoming a martyr, that he succeeded in becoming a martyr. It's what I would like to do as well.
تحتاج منا إلى الثبات.
I want to be a suicide bomber, she told me. It's wrong to live for yourself rather than die for Palestine.
ولكن تحتاج إلى الشهادة أكثر.
Gaza's great and good turned out to pay their respects to the martyr, the Shaheed. I'd been in Gaza less than 24 hours, and already I was seeing that everyone was trapped in a lethal ritual. Sheikh Yassin, the spiritual leader of Hamas, turned up in his wheelchair. The dead boy was now part of a political process. His father was almost a bystander. He says, I raised my children through religion to be good Muslims, but I didn't raise them having them become shaheeds in mind. I'd prefer if they didn't do that. That wasn't my intention, but they learn their religion and they have to make up their own minds, but it wouldn't have been his choice. People like Osama's father have watched in dismay as their children have been turned into radicals. Gaza was ruled by Egypt when Palestinians fled here after Israel was formed in 1948. In 1967, Israel invaded Gaza, but 5 years ago allowed it some limited independence. A new Palestinian authority, headed by Yasser Arafat, took on the job of policing Gaza and looking after its 1 million people. But the hope of that time has turned to despair. I discovered that nearly everyone gets their food from the United Nations. The local economy stalled when the peace process collapsed into violence 14 months ago and Israel shut its borders with Gaza. There's anger at Israel and disillusionment with Yasser Arafat. This highway has been closed since the beginning of the Intifada 14 months ago. We can't go any further because there's a risk of being shot at. We drove along the no man's land that separates Israeli settlements from Gaza. My destination was a school run by the United Nations. This is an English class. Yes. We're to test their English. I wanted to ask them what they'd hoped to do at their education.
Hello.
I never got the chance.
There's a particularly loud and sound seemingly dangerous gun battle going on on the other side of the schoolroom wall.
A firefight had erupted around an Israeli checkpoint. This happens all the time, the teachers told me. On my third night, I went to the Rafah district of Gaza. People tell you it's not a place for outsiders, but I've been invited by a man whose father was both high up in Arafat's Al-Fatah group and a minister in his Palestinian Authority.
We're on our way to the Rafah Community Centre. It's a Fatah organised event, and it's to celebrate, or at least to commemorate, the 76 martyrs from Rafah, people who've died in the last year since the beginning of the new Intifada.
Nothing is as it seems in Gaza. The way it's usually portrayed is that Fatah is a secular political organisation of old men loyal to Yasser Arafat. Hamas are the religious tearaways. But this was a Fatah meeting introducing the newly formed Al-Aqsa battalion, young and militant. I got the feeling I'd been invited down to see that Arafat was still a force to be reckoned with among the young. But as the old guard gave their speeches, some of the youngsters began to fidget. They want action, not talk. Soon fights broke out among different factions. The leadership tried to restore order, but failed. Compared with the way Hamas had controlled the funeral, this was chaos.
We're getting out of here in a hurry. There's a lot of commotion going on. The speaker asked the militiamen to stop firing. He said, this is not the place for shooting. There was an angry response from the back. Someone let off a volley of shots, and half the people rushed out of the hall to try and stop him. Now half of them seem to have stormed out. There's been a lot more shooting. The speaker was yelling, save your bullets for the Israelis. Don't waste your bullets now. But I'm not quite sure what's happening, and I don't think it's very safe to be here anymore.
While punches flew, the Fatah elders tried to play down the trouble. Just a little misunderstanding, they said. I was taken to meet a leader of the military wing of Fatah, on condition that we didn't show his face. He was more open about the problem.
He says that the clash we saw at tonight's rally isn't a particularly fair indication. He says, though, he acknowledges, though, that some people within the movement are loyal to dissidents within Fatah. That is a problem. He says it all depends on whether or not a fair political solution is reached for Palestine. If that doesn't happen, then it will be impossible, he says, to contain those in the group who prefer the military option or who are looking for military action.
Outside, the shooting went on. But there was worse to come the next night. In my hotel, I could pick up a news channel broadcast from Lebanon by extremists. There'd been 2 terrible suicide bombs in Jerusalem. Hamas was trumpeting its responsibility for the atrocities. 10 people were dead and 180 injured. The next morning, an Israeli reconnaissance plane circled ominously overhead. Hamas had another martyr to bury. He'd had nothing to do with the bombs, but he'd murdered an Israeli settler the night before. Enraged by the Jerusalem attacks, Israel was demanding that Yasser Arafat crack down on Hamas. Arafat was telling the world he'd ban demonstrations like this. But the Palestinian police wandered restlessly in the crowd, powerless, or maybe unwilling, to stop the funeral. Allahu Akbar. Hamas was staging a show of strength. Its followers were defying both Israel and Yasser Arafat by staying on the streets.
This mosque is full of Hamas supporters. The mullah is telling them it's time to steel themselves against the Israelis. He's saying that in this conflict, now everybody here is united with Hamas.
The young men in white, I was told, hoped to be chosen as suicide bombers. I made my way through the crowd to talk to them.
أفضل طبقة تعيش في المجتمع وتنال أفضل طبقة يعني.
He said, we love life. He said, we don't choose to be martyrs because we want to die. He said, don't get it wrong. Most of the suicide bombers who blow themselves up, they have a good economic level. They're happy to be alive. But as long as this land isn't free, as long as it's occupied, this is what they have to do. Word spread through the crowd that there'd been another Hamas suicide bomb, this time on a bus in Haifa. 15 Israelis dead, 35 injured. We waited for Israel's retaliation. Somewhere over there I can hear the helicopters. Oh my God, look! Look, there's two of them. Thousands of miles away, American bombers were pounding Afghanistan in their war against terrorism. Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had guessed this was one moment he wouldn't get a restraining tap on the shoulder from Washington. Oh my God. I don't see flames or smoke. There are helicopters flying across Gaza City, more flying across the seafront. There are just helicopters everywhere, bombing. It feels like everything is a target. There's no sense of security here at all, none whatsoever. I went to look at the damage. It was clear the Israelis held Yasser Arafat responsible for the Hamas suicide bombs. Gaza was his patch, and he was letting Hamas flourish. We can see that it was Yasser Arafat's aircraft hangar that was attacked. His two helicopters had been emblems of his authority. Suddenly, people told us to run. We've had to run. We've been told to get out of here now that the Israelis are bombing again. We've just got to get out of here as fast as possible.
Aircraft in the sky.
Aircrafts in the sky. Helicopters. This is where they bombed before, and this is definitely where they're going to attack again. More bombs fell. Israel said it was fighting terrorism, just like America. On the ground, I found the Israeli strike seemed to fuel support for Hamas and the extremists. I asked, how does she feel about the suicide bombers in Haifa, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv? She said, we defend what they do. If nobody else goes to defend us, nobody's going to help us. She said, we would like to go ourselves as girls and do that. She said, if we don't commit suicide bombings, if we don't have suicide bombings in Israel, they will come into Gaza and kill us here, so we have to go to them. I heard a major police headquarters had been destroyed. Arafat's grip on Gaza was weakening. That woman shouting had just had her home destroyed. I went over the road to a block of flats. It had been caught in the attack on the police headquarters. Until this morning, this was somebody's sitting room. Look at it now. 16 people had nowhere to live. Hamas is famed for helping and recruiting the dispossessed. When I asked them whether they'd join Hamas, they shrugged. We'll join whoever can help us. I went to the hospital. There are children in there. That girl has shrapnel wounds on her face. 160 people had been hurt, many children caught between school and home. He's 17, he's a high school student, someone who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Okay.
I met some women from the family who'd been in the flat opposite the police headquarters. She's 9 months pregnant, and this is her daughter, who was also injured in the attack. We've come to the house of Dr. Ayad Siraj. As you can see, in the same street just across the road, a building has been bombed in an earlier attack. Ayad Siraj is a psychiatrist, a world expert on suicide bombers. I wanted to ask what forces shape them. He was in a gloomy mood.
This is the most dangerous time for the world since the World War II.
What's the right profile for somebody who can carry out a martyrdom, a suicide bombing? Or
It is the motivation, the anger, the political despair. At the end of the day, makes a suicide bomber. It is the insult on his dignity. We have no armies to fight. What do you want to do as an Arab Muslim Palestinian who feels so desperate to try and liberate your country? You join a clandestine group, somebody in the underground. There you have the teaching of Islam that tells you, according to this interpretation, which is very serious, that if you die, you don't die. You are glorified as a martyr. Your family will be in the highest status. You will be like a prophet. And what is better reward for a humiliated, defeated, helpless, hopeless person? What is a better reward than to live in the arms of God?
that night on the radio, I heard George Bush denounce Hamas as among the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world. I had an appointment to keep with hundreds of its most fervent followers. They wanted me to watch a farewell video two new martyrs had made before their mission to murder an Israeli settler. In the video, they ask for forgiveness from their grieving relatives and say they'll see them in heaven, where they prefer to be. Hamas's vocabulary doesn't include a peace deal with Israel. I asked the brother of one of the killers about his vision for the future. Does that leave room for Israel too? Can they share the land?
No. This land for me and for our Palestinian, no Jews.
For Hamas, Israel is the old enemy. The new enemy is Arafat's police. During the night, under Israeli pressure, Arafat had told his men to put Hamas's spiritual leader under house arrest. More and more people are gathering to come to the house of Sheikh Yassin. The road's been closed, so we've been forced to walk the last bit. I'm not quite sure what to expect when we get here. I had the answer soon enough. More violence. This time Palestinian against Palestinian. It was a sign of how convoluted the politics of Gaza had become.
Quick, they're shooting.
We're back at the Shifa hospital, this time to see if there are any victims of clashes between Palestinian police and Palestinian protesters.
You heard that?
You heard one person or more. So we've just heard that there are martyrs from last night's violent clashes outside Yassin's house, which means a Palestinian must have been killed by the Palestinian police. I want to ask the soldiers, can we see the man who was injured last night at Sheikh Yassin's house? They're rejecting the idea that somebody was badly injured last night and is in intensive care. They're saying, no, there's nobody here severely injured. They've left the hospital. Before, they'd wanted me to see the casualties of violence. Not now. They were ashamed.
Hello, doctor.
I insisted on being taken to see the hospital's director.
Someone in the hospital told us that a man died at Sheikh Yassin's house last night. Do you have a dead person from last night?
One of them, they told me that, yes, his name is Ahmed Karim Silmi.
His name was Ahmed.
Okay,
Shukran. Bye.
Goodbye.
I had a name, but I wanted to see the body for myself. I went to the morgue, but someone had telephoned ahead. I knew by now that the victim was a member of a powerful Hamas family. His parents didn't know he was dead, and everyone was worried about what would happen when they found out.
This is a very surreal situation. We're having an argument over who can go in and see a body, whether or not we can film the sign outside the door. And meanwhile, I think there's a bombing raid starting outside, because I can hear the planes. So this is utterly insane, this situation.
His relatives gathered by the doors of the morgue. Nervous Palestinian police monitored what was happening. I had been in Gaza for 2 weeks. He was the third martyr I'd seen consigned to the arms of God, but the first to be shot by a Palestinian policeman. This time, no one from Hamas was celebrating the glorious martyr's sacrifice. As they passed the nearby police station, the children shouted, "Traitors, Israelis." In my 2 weeks in Gaza, I'd seen powers slip away from Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority towards Hamas and the extremists, people with no interest in peace talks, but that wasn't all. After September the 11th, George Bush said that anyone who harbours a terrorist is a terrorist. By that reckoning, pretty much everyone here is a terrorist. America's bombed its terrorist enemies. It would smack of hypocrisy to stop Israel doing the same. Don't hold your breath for a peace deal. Talking's out of fashion.